Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you very much for coming. Good morning to those of you in the Americas. Good afternoon to everyone here in Europe. Today we're delighted to welcome Humberto Laudares from the University of Geneva. Humberto took undergraduate degrees in political science at the University of Sao Paulo and in business administration at the Getúlio Vargas Foundation. He then went on to take an MBA in economic policy management at Columbia University, and he obtained his PhD in economics from the Graduate Institute in Geneva. At the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, Humberto decided to undertake a second PhD, this time in global health, at the University of Geneva to complement his research agenda. He has 15 years of experience working with economic policy in international organizations such as the World Bank and the Global Fund, as well as Brazil's public sector. His research interests are in development economics and global health. Today, he'll be presenting work co-authored with Felipe Valencia Caicedo from the Vancouver School of Economics at the University of British Columbia. As usual, we'll have about 30 minutes for the presentation and about 25 minutes for questions. Humberto, thank you so much for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Emiliano. Muchas gracias. I will skip my Portuñol avançado today. And so I went to stick to English. I think it's going to be better for everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thanks very much for the invitation on behalf of Felipe as well. And today I'm presenting our joint paper, Tordesillas, Slavery and Origins of Brazilian Inequality. So the main motivation here is pretty much to try to explain something that argument that is very much widespread in social science in general, that slavery is associated to current inequality and also underdevelopment. While there is more evidence, especially from the work of Nathan Nunn, that African countries where the slaves left, that it's associated, slavery is associated with inequality, there is much less evidence on the receiving end of the spectrum. And that's exactly what we're trying to focus on here. And as we know, it's a big challenge to establish a causal relationship here because of the endogeneity in the placement of slaves, and also for lack of historical data. So those limitations are crucial to come up with the identification that I'm briefly going to explain to you in a few slides. And why Brazil? Brazil, it's actually a quite interesting case to study because it received about 45% of all the slaves that left Africa. That's a huge number. I'm going to show you this graph here that you can see this number very well illustrated in the Eltz and Richardson map. And also was the last country to abolish slavery in 1888. And nowadays, it has been for a while one of the most unequal countries in the world, if not the most, depends the year. And according to the 2010, most people self-declare as non-white. And obviously, here you have interesting issue about race self-declaration to itself, but we are also going to try to tackle that later in the paper, and I come back to it. So what do? We exploit econometric discontinuity provided by the Tordesillas line that predates the discovery of Brazil. I mean, speaking for a Spanish and a Latin American crowd, I think everyone is familiar to that. Once you speak to a different crowd, they confuse Tordesillas with quesadillas, and we need to really explain what it's about. But we try to exploit this discontinuity and see what is the long-term impact of slavery and economic inequality. We are mostly focused here to test the part of the Engerman-Sokolov hypothesis, especially the link here in red. The whole hypothesis is how natural endowments end up to slavery, plantations, economic inequality, and underdevelopment. you are trying to measure here the link between slavery and economic inequality. And for that, obviously, we are dialoguing with widespread literature in seminal pieces on inequality, or in more structural ways, as Engelman, Sokolov, as I said. But specifically in the receiving end, I think there are two papers.
Laudares, X1, and Humberto Laudares.
I'm sorry, it's my sound system. We are dialoguing pretty much with two papers. First is the
Laudares, X1, and Humberto Laudares.
Sorry,
don't worry.
I don't know what's going on, but it's Semoglu and Garcia Jimeno that they analyzed the impact of slavery in Colombia, and Melissa Dell's paper on Mita in Peru, even though Mita is not the same as slavery. But I think those are the best reference that we have here. So what is the Tordesillas? I think I'm going to be quick here because everyone studied at high school. But what is interesting here for us is like that line was two things. First, that predate discovery. Second, and that's important to fundament what we did in the identification. It was a bit uncertain where actually the line was, because that was defined as 307 leagues west of Cape Verde, but they didn't say that was in the east of the island or the west of the island. So this difference about 1 degree. And you are going to apply that in the identification. The third thing here that is also very important, this is the most important treaty for the colonization of the Americas. There is no other treaty that was more important and fundamental during the colonization. And that's I mean, the main reason here that you are studying the Tordesillas, and we do think there is some kind of path dependence for even different mechanisms around the line. This is the first drawing by Cantino. I think I'm pretty sure on behalf of the Portuguese crown. And again, coming back to some facts of slavery in Brazil, 10.7 million African slaves disembarked in their destinations, while 44% in Brazil, as I mentioned before. And in the core of identification, we rely on the evidence that Portugal had a comparative advantage of slave trade in relation to Spain. And actually, Portugal had a comparative in relation to the rest of the world. In period, there's many evidence showing that, and also explaining why. And they were more efficient, and also to be more efficient, they're like the costs were lower for Portugal than any other nations in extract slaves in Portugal. And the Spanish trade, slave trade, was mostly focused on Central America. For example, Cuba was the main destination, and the Caribbean. While there was some slaves to the Rio da Plata, in terms of percentage, was not. 68% went to Cuba, for instance. And here is the picture again. I'm going to skip. And so what do you do here? We are going to rely on historical data. There was an imperial census in 1872 before the abolition of slavery in 88. And you are going to rely on modern data to explore the results, the current results. And then you use the census 2010, but also all the census available, to be honest, and mostly, most important, the ones that have race difference. That was the 91, 2000, 2010. Before there was not much, but some variables such as land inequality, for instance, it was good to check before and doesn't need racial data. We also use surveys like Batibarometer or census data on municipality level, educational data, in other variables that Naritomi works in her paper, some skin color data on that pigmentocracies, they call this, there's a sociologist called Edward Tellis, and you are going to also use. So just looking at this picture, you can see how was the slavery distribution in municipalities in 1872. And what, this is the line. And we use here the most updated line that is 48.7. And in this line, we are talking here about regressions continued design as identification, in which you are going to test the Portuguese side, because have comparative advantage on slavery. So our hypothesis, there is more slave in the Portuguese side, more slavery in the Portuguese side than the Spanish side. And then you are going to perform the same analysis with covariates to see if it's smooth on, and the main variable of interest is inequality as well. And our analysis, you use this historical data also to update for current municipalities in a method that's called áreas mínimas comparáveis, performed by BGE. It's well known in the literature. And then you have even more granular data.
Yes, X1 and Humberto.
If it does that again, I'm going to turn it off. So sorry, sorry for that. But this is the maps, the province that we are going to discuss. So the estimation equation is a traditional RDD, but you are going to do a Dunnet RDD. And here in the middle, you are going to do 1 degree in each side as a standard measure, even though you test different degrees.
Yes, X1 and Humberto.
Okay, I'm sorry for that. I just need to change my sound system now. Otherwise, I don't hear anything. Emiliano, can you say something just to see if I can hear?
Yeah. Hello.
Wait.
Can you hear me?
Oh.
Hello. Hi. Hello. Hello. But
so I'm going to continue, and then I fix later. Sorry for that, guys. So in this Dunnet RDD is specified here. So you want to see, you pretty much have the distance from the Portuguese side, positive measures 0 to 1,000 something, and the left side 0 to minus 2,500. But pretty much you test at most like 1,000 kilometers, because it's too much. Is already enough for a RDD, and you also test a smaller distance. And just to have a sense of what we're talking here about, what you call Portuguese Brazil and Spanish Brazil, there's quite balanced the amount of municipalities, and also you can see right away in these statistics that the number of slaves in the Portuguese side is substantially higher than the Spanish side, while the population it's higher, but not as higher relatively than the Spanish side. Here's just to show the frequency of the municipalities, or you do the Macrae test, the RDD density, everything looks pretty much the same. Whatever, if you're interested in more tests, you can always show. The covariates are quite smooth. We test several of them. We show here in this graph 4-year foundation, which is quite important to be smooth, rainfall, altitude, distance to the coasts, and all those covariates, you include the Dunnet of 1 degree. So, and once you come to the data of 1872, you see that the slave per capita jumps clearly from on the cutoff. And also, we see the total population in absolute terms also higher in the Portuguese side than the Spanish side. And this is pretty much the summary of the paper. And that's our main argument here. Once the slave per capita is higher in the Portuguese side, nowadays, the income inequality is also going to be higher, and that's what I observe. We are talking here about something as 10% of the Brazilian inequality could be explained by the persistence of slavery. And I'm going to show you later that this is not only inequality within races, it's a structural inequality within white, within, we can check all the census, and within racial, within each race, it jumps. However, the difference between the gap between blacks and white also jumps significantly, like about 20%. That's what I just said. Once you see the Gini white, Gini black, we also test for the theo between, within, and it confirms what I just told you. Once it comes to the income, it's a bit tricky, and we still don't have a great explanation for you, because once you go to the theory, you're going to think that Engel and Sokolov, you're going to say, oh, it's going to be underdeveloped, it's going to be poorer, but we don't find that here. But as I said, we do find a significant income ratio gap between black and white. We test those things for non-white as well, including pardos, but you need to be cautious, because non-white in Brazil is not non-white in the US. The Brazilian society, if you go to see all the sociological studies, it's completely different. It's not so divided as in the US, and pardos is the majority of the population, but I can be pardo without any problem. Obviously, I can be pardo in the US, but in Brazil, I'm quite white. I could self-declare myself without any problem. Nobody would ever recriminate me for that. So those are the main results of the estimations, in which you do the RDD order 1, order 2, and also the local randomization with smaller brackets, and the results here that you are going to suggest that if you take, for instance, our main reference, that is the first one, we are going to explain about 10% of the Gini of the Brazilian inequality nowadays. We as I said, use áreas comparáveis mínimas, or áreas comparáveis mínimas, and you cluster for that. You use state fixed effects, which kind of work with a line fixed effect, but a bit bigger because of the states. But it's all the results they hold. Once you apply, sorry, I'm talking here about slave per capita. And I was interpreting the Gini, so, but this is slave per capita, but it shows the jump significant, and then it comes to the Gini, we observe exactly the same results, and that's what I'm saying. It's about 10% here. You can compare with the mean dependent variable of the current Gini index. And you come here again to the results of racial income gap. As I mentioned to you, it's negative because it's black over white. So that's the results observed, and it's significant, consistent what I described to you before. So in the nutshell, the number of slaves in 1872 is around 5% higher on the Portuguese side of the border, consistent with the colonial power comparative advantage in its trade. So that was our argument. However, once you come to the inequality, it's 10% higher. And income black households on average 8% lower than in the white households. So that's the racial gap. I said the number wrong before, so I'm just correct myself. So obviously you see that all this work, and it's like, okay, that's great, but what are the mechanisms? And here there's a big work to be done and to test, because first you need to test the main variables that Ungerman and Sokolov mentioned. I mean, what about land inequality, vote, institutional capacity, judiciary, also trust that based on the work of Nunn and Washington, and we do not find anything significant for those variables. However, and there is explanation for that, but we look more in detail three main channels: that's education, labor market, and racial prejudice. First, we observe that the Black illiteracy, this graphic, the name here is wrong, I'm sorry for that. So while it doesn't jump here, you see a huge difference in terms of the right side of the graph, of the cutoff, especially closer to the coast. So on average is higher, but even though there is on the cutoff, it doesn't jump. We also observe here that in 1872, once you come back to before the abolition is the graph C, the free to slave literacy ratio is significantly higher in the Portuguese side. But nowadays, you do observe more Blacks out of school in the Portuguese side and the Spanish side. Once we go to the labor market, we observe that both the intensive and the extensive margin, the Portuguese side here, it jumps. Once you see the Black hours worked, Black hours work in the right side of the cutoff, it's significantly lower than in the left side. While the hours work, there's a wage gap. It's higher in the Portuguese side than in the left. While Black underdevelopment, unemployment, it is relatively smooth, but it has on average something, I mean, overall a higher level. Finally, once you try to look at racial prejudice, which is a very complicated way to measure, but I think we at least go to the right sources for that. There is a Latin barometer survey done to measure skin color in Brazil, and the skin color, it varies from 1 to 12 and 11 actually. So the whitest to the darkest. And this is a way to analyze race without the self-declaration based on 5 categories. And once you do a Oaxaca decomposition here in the Portuguese side and compared to the Spanish side, we do confirm that there's a higher level, a higher jump here in income, while the darkest, the lower the income, and the darkest lower education, and that's quite a striking graph. At least I find the first 2 ones, how the color of the skin it relates to income and also education in such a way. Once you go a bit further and check the survey that they have on prejudice, while you do find a higher level in prejudice index, it's not significant, but on average is higher. we are talking here about a survey. On top, they have 6,000 interviews, but the last one, the C, has 1,000. So it's not a lot. So, but again, we are still trying to find more sources to analyze this type of data, but it's not something very widespread. And more institutionally, we do find that municipalities in the right side have much more racial equality consoles nowadays than the left side of the cutoff. And that's also a finding that could evidence where there is a bigger racial problem, there is a more response from the public sector. So we do have many other tests that I will not have time to talk about. My time it's almost there, but we do test for the colonized identity, because you say, oh, the Portuguese and the Spanish are talking about the colonized identity here. Actually not. Once you test the Dutch came to Brazil. They implemented the same infrastructure of the Portuguese, trying to be more efficient and compete. And once you see there's no jump in the borders between the Dutch colonization area and the Portuguese colonization area as well. Other mechanisms, and I mentioned that already, that land inequality voting, they're not very significant in our results. We do use alternative meridians, and it confirms our results. We do a data-driven approach for Gini's, and I mean, imagine as if you don't have the line, and then you calculate the Gini by the longitude, and the graph is like this. So we are almost here in the maximum. I'm going to try to press here. Yeah, so that's it. It's a data-driven approach that I have here. Also, we test different alternative bandwidth, donuts, aggregation, data source, measure. We have another fiscal data on 1872. It's a censitary fiscal data that we do have slaves because they're property. The results are pretty much the same. And also different years. 1890, while slavery was abolished, we do find more blacks in the right hand side of the cutoff, and Gini from the 80 to 2010. So just to conclude, and I think you can discuss better because my time is ending, we showed that the number of black slaves over the total population in 1872 was discontinually larger on the Portuguese side of the Tordesillas compared to the Spanish side, and it was about 5%. Applying the donut RDD, we do find a treatment effect on income inequality of 0.04 points, which corresponds 10% of the current Brazilian inequality measured by Gini index. And possible channels of persistence that you find are income gap between blacks and whites, education, education, labor markets, and racial prejudice. There's a typo here. And I thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to discuss with you.
Thank you very much, Humberto. That was.
And I need to fix my sound system now.
Yeah. I'll give you a few seconds to do that. Thank you very much. That was an extremely interesting paper, and I thought a very clear presentation as well. Very clear data visualizations too. So the floor is now open while everyone gathers their thoughts. Can you hear me now, Humberto? Humberto?
Hello?
Hello, can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes. Thank you so much.
Great.
I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. And thank you very much for the presentation, which I thought was extremely interesting. So now we have space for questions. I'm going to start with one while everyone gathers their thoughts. And my question is about the timing of your cutoff right, relative to the chronology of the slave trade going to Brazil. Mm-hmm. So you speak of Spanish Brazil and Portuguese Brazil, but of course, most slaves, about 70% of slaves, arrived in Brazil after 1777, say, when I guess all of Brazil was Portuguese Brazil. I mean, when in that case, the Treaty of San Ildefonso substituted the Tordesillas line. So what I mean is, do you think the legacy of having, you know, the legacy of the preceding centuries is so strong that the new areas now under Portuguese control couldn't benefit from this comparative advantage of slave trading? Because again, 70% of the slaves came in a period where Tordesillas wasn't, you know, being applied. So I guess that would be my question, whether, because you are measuring slaveholding and the intensity of slavery almost 400 years after Tordesillas. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, that's a great point, and we have discussed that quite a bit. What I mean, obviously, there are challenges in this type of identification, in the sense that we're talking about historic data here, but we do believe that they might have a persistence over time during the colonial period, that the Tordesillas line matter, and once you check for other things that could be related to that, especially with a new configuration of the country, we don't see much. What happened here is also that Brazil expanded to the left, but it was also not followed by intensive economic activity right in the 18th century, for instance. And until the 19th century, the very west of Brazil was completely unknown. If you see the maps, they're like one unknown Brazil, even though it was Brazilian borders. And actually, I have other papers on this type of stuff. So we do think that the Tordesillas was quite important, and the potential explanation here is that they know that there was Tordesillas, they don't know exactly where it was, but also they didn't want to put a lot of money to develop economic activities in the left of a land that was not ratified until 1777. So there was a risk somehow linked to that, especially for big plantations. So that's the logic that leads us to believe that it does make sense to use the Tordesillas line here. Again, far from perfect, but it's I think historically there are some evidence to say, okay, well, let's give a try, and it does make sense if you check the other variables. Coffee, all the other things is still, I mean, our argument holds, and yes, that's pretty much our explanation, Emiliano. But we do recognize the limitations.
No, but thank you, Humberto. I think that's an excellent answer, sort of the path dependency of previous investment, and particularly in this kind of, in plantations as well. So I have Alfonso Herranz and then Jose Perez Cajias. Alfonso?
Yeah, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Humberto. This was really interesting. I love it. My question is kind of related to Emiliano's. So I was thinking about, okay, why are we talking about the Tordesillas line when we are speaking about the slave trade that was kind of later on, when the line was kind of forgotten at some point? And I was thinking that maybe to some extent we might be capturing, let's say, something of a gradient. So from Africa or from the Atlantic to the interior of the country. So let's say, and this, but you said at the same time, you said that you were trying like different meridians, like I guess it's like a placebo analysis, no? So but still my doubt is that maybe we are capturing a gradient from the Atlantic to the interior. But then I saw I finished very soon. I saw your last picture with where you show that the maximum Gini is reached very close to the line. And then this is where I got lost, because I assumed that, okay, we should find the maximum Gini in the areas of maximum concentration of slaves. And I guess they should be closer to the Atlantic and not closer to the line, following this logic about where we do more investment and where is actually economic activity concentrated. So, I mean, it's not a very clear-cut question, but it's just a lot of doubts when I was listening to you. But still, I found the paper really interesting, very nice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Afonso. I think that's a great observation. And so what I hear what you said, I'm going to tell what I think it's cool in this identification based on that. So the coast of Brazil is, if you think most of those results, they're not in the coast. And actually the Tordesillas goes more closer to the coast in the south, but not in the north, where there's a lot of slavery in the northeast. And that's a very unequal part of Brazil. But what do you think here that why the RDD it's good? Because you're comparing, and especially the local randomization, we are really measuring something very, very narrow around the cutoff. So we are not going to we are not really dealing with the coast of Bahia, Pernambuco. We are talking about something that it's much closer to the line, given the donut, but that's more comparable. And I think that's I mean, methodologically, that's the way that I go about your question. And about the gradient, so we do use another ones. They're not placebo, and the results still hold. But this one is technically the last review of the line. That's why we use. But within this donut, there are other meridians as well, that if you apply, you are going to find similar results, a bit smaller, a bit higher, but as you can see here, it's going to be the same. I could do the same graph for slavery here. That's actually could be a good idea to point out your argument. I think it would be very useful to visualize. Thank you very much, also.
Jose?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Humberto, for your great presentation. I have a question which is perhaps not helpful for your paper in order to be published, but it's more related with the theoretical implications and the general discussion about economic history. And when I was looking at your presentation, I find it very fascinating, and I think it's very interesting. But I was remembering this Leticia Arroyo criticism on persistence works, and one of her arguments is related with the idea that agency matters. So when you look at persistent works, agency is not incorporated. When you were presenting and you were saying that Melissa Dale is is a great example of this persistent work. And I'm from Bolivia, and this is very interesting. When you present Melissa Dale's works for economists, everybody's happy, the model is great, econometrics is fantastic. But when you present this to historians, some noise starts to appear. They highlight that the evolution of the labor market was more complex, etc. And they also try to highlight that in the case of Bolivian indigenous community, there is like a long-term tradition of organization, and this may explain why do we have this why do we have an indigenous president? So I was wondering, again, in your case, what could be the role of agency? Again, perhaps you don't have to put this in your paper, but to say something on this general debate about what is the useful, what can we learn from persistence work? What do you think that could be the role of agency in the case of Black populations in Brazil, or the lack of agency? Sorry for this.
I think
sorry for this question.
No, I mean, this is. I think that all of this is fascinating, and we really need to think about all those stuff. I must say, just to start with your point, once you present it to historians or economic historians, like the traditional ones, there's always a passionate discussion. Maybe the difference from Melissa's work and ours, because we based on their work to try to prove a causal effect that it's already more than talked and discussed in history. What really bothered them that we don't talk too much about the process. And said that one of the good feedbacks that received at the MBR is to it was related to that, not in a historical way, not in a traditional economic history way, but it's to develop more the argument after abolition. And I think it deals exactly with your argument. And to point something even more interesting that I cannot test, because my bright president, he gave up doing the census, so it was to be released 2 years ago. We still don't know when it's going to come up, but the part of the society that is going to self-declare Black might increase substantially. Because in the last 10 years, the role of the Black movements, the Black people as being proud of it and being much more active and actually more successful in labor markets and education, voicing their proud. I think that's going to be an extremely interesting way to explore more this argument than in 2010. Again, here, and you know how economic papers are limited to a point that you need to prove. We take history as something, okay, we respect that. I think that's great. We just want to try to test this specific piece of evidence, which is hard enough. But by any means, we try to minimize the complexity of these relationships. I think as the next version, the version that you hopefully submit, we are going to incorporate more this dimension in the paper, and so that's really welcome comment, because obviously for any of those papers, I think in persistence, I have a social science background as well, so. And then you're a bit puzzled by, okay, that's great, but why? Why so many years that we still have 150 years, we still explain 10% of inequality? But yes, you can go labor markets, education, prejudice. That's strong enough. Does it dialogue with the historical literature? It does. Are you as complex as the historical literature, the sociological literature, that there are arguments that we are not, because we cannot measure everything that they talk about, and they can also not measure. They have different methods. So I think while this is the limitation of this field, this is also the strength. For instance, yesterday I was with a specialist, a really bright scholar, a sociologist in Geneva. She was one of the key researchers on the Perla project. And again, from different perspectives, but she really loved it, because it's a different perspective for a problem that she looks all the time. She's very specialized, but we bring another way to look at it and also to measure it with all the shortcomings. And I think economists should be maybe well, humble what they can do, what they cannot do, because sometimes we really think that we can explain everything from other fields without have the humility to understand better. And yeah, that's my very humble interpretation of that. And thank you very much. I think your point is really key for the next step of the paper.
Thank you, Humberto. I think that's a very important answer in a way. I think in this webinar as well, we try to bring into dialogue different ways of doing economic history, different ways of studying long-term development. And so yeah, I think learning from all the different methods and approaches is the way to go. I have one question while I'm looking at other raised hands. I have one question about regional inequality. So, which I'm sure is something you've looked at with your data, right? But so if the main channel of persistence is this sort of long-term shadow of initial investments that are sort of built into the agricultural export economy, right? From the Tordesillas period onto the late 18th and 19th centuries. If that is an important channel here, then there could be a way in which those investments actually have a positive impact in, long-term average incomes in Brazilian regions, right? That were onto the right of the line. So I was just wondering whether, you have something to say about, whether there's any discontinuity in terms of relative incomes across Brazilian regions, right? They're not looking at inequality within provinces, but between them.
Yes, I think this is a great point. As I mentioned, and maybe we should take a more careful look. Once you see the average income, we do see that there is a jump, but not in the way expected by the theory. So we have a higher income in the right-hand side, but we haven't invested too much in the income part of the paper because we're more interested on inequality, and the income side that we invest was the income difference among ratio, and that it's completely consistent within the regions. But we do perform the regional analysis north-south, and we find that both areas have follow the same results, but that's another point that you are going to amend in the next version, because that was a comment that we received, important comment that we received, and it's okay, we actually have the results, but we haven't used them, and you will do it. And because obviously, if you go to the south, it's rich, and the north it's poor nowadays. Both are unequal, but some are more unequal than the others. And we are going to deal with this dimension as well. And I think it's very pointed out, very well pointed out. Yeah.
Thank you, Humberto. We have a few minutes left for another question. Someone has one more question.
Other things that people comment about the quilombos, the resistance community, we test everything as well. It follows the same, but then we decide to, that's a different story, because it's more resistant, and since it was more controversial, we decide to focus on that. We test.
But wait, sorry, Humberto, that does seem very interesting and ties into Jose's point about agency, right? So, so what sort of data do you have? Do you have like spatially explicit data on slave rebellions and stuff like that, right?
Yes, but we did the first version of the paper. We did the matching to compare, and then you do find more lower income, more inequality, everything that you expect in theory. But the thing is the same of capitanias hereditárias. we do analyze that, but then once you try to fit in this story here, we need to go a bit broader. So that's why I didn't even mention the quilombos to Jose, because we took it out of the paper, but it's very interesting. It's a fascinating story, and so far consistent with that. But we are actually working on a different paper to address this issue.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. Yeah, I was going to say that sounds like a different paper, but an extremely important one as well. And also, you know, allowing you to dialogue with this kind of very rich social and economic historiography but kind of bringing in more kind of systematic measurement of it and of its impacts, right?
But as I said, I mean, we need to deal with very specific things each time. And that's a bit of the problem, but also the strength of those type of methods. And yes, but that's the next phase. We need to focalize more, and we need to invest a lot on the mechanisms as well. And
well, thank you very much, Humberto, and best of luck in the next stage with this project, which I imagine is close to submission. And thank you very much for your presentation and for your answers. And thank you everybody for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Emiliano, Jose, Paola, Jorge, Alfonso, and Mark as well. Thanks so much. All the best.
Thank you.
You too, Humberto. Thank you very much.
All the best. Ciao.